So, I thought it'd be a great idea since, it's kind of that time of the year where there's really nothing to talk about that we start speculating on 2024 because here's the truth, everybody. No, we don't actually care about elections. We just like talking about elections.
But wouldn't that mean we care about him, Nick?
No, because we don't care about like we really don't care about them. We just care about the horse race aspect. So we're always speculating about elections, and then the election happens, and we talk about it for about 5 minutes, and then we move on to what does this mean to 2026, and so on and so forth. David, I'd like to hear who is your front runner. Is going to be the front runner, maybe the nominee for president for the Republicans in 2024.
I think that my money right now is on my pillow guy because I know there's a lot of figures that are smarter than him. There's also, of course, Don Jr., but these folks I think just don't have it, right? Like they don't have whatever weird, like, you know how dogs hear things at a certain frequency and normal people just can't pick it up, but the dogs, their ears just perk up when they hear things just on whatever vibrations are being let out by a certain noise. I think the My Pillow guy, Mike Lindell or whatever the hell his name is, I think he has that, and I don't think the other people do, because I think at the end of the day, a lot of people try to call Trumpism like a sort of nationalist populist sort of like project, but I don't think they have an ideology. It's just sort of collected aggrievement and pettiness,
cackling,
cattiness. Also, it's just this blob of like unpleasant things that an aggrieving white male complaining about just draws in other people like that. And I think Mike Lindell has that. So I go for Lindell.
But I think it's just like, if you like quote unquote say it like it is, like look how far Trump went with that. Like if his son does that too, then the base is gonna totally rally around the most batshit Republican candidate they can find. And like,
well, okay, Cameron, who's your choice for?
I hate to say this, but I just can't get it how evil Tom Cotton is, and he seems like the most like quote unquote like reasonable candidate.
Jesus.
That's
grim.
It's like I fear for a Tom Cotton candidacy.
Tom Cotton's scary because I think Tom Cotton is just as much a fascist as Trump is, but is an actual like ideologue fascist. Because Trump's not a fascist because he actually cares. He's a fascist because he's just circumstances have led him to fascism.
But I know like Tom Cotton like kind of angled himself to wanting to be like a Supreme Court judge, like something who would be a part of the courts. You know what I mean? But I think if the Republicans want something quote unquote reasonable and sinister, they go Tom Cotton. But ultimately, I think what we see is that the more batshit you are, like the more the Republican base will come to you.
And see, that's actually why I think Mike Lindell has a better chance, because Tom Cotton is a more competent villain than Trump or Lindell, but I don't think he has the ability to his attempts at trying to sound like populist and unhinged just don't come off as authentic as Trump and Lindell, because Trump and Lindell, like, they are legitimately just aggrieved blowhard idiots. And I think the base connects with that. And I don't think a lot of them would connect as strongly with Cotton. They would vote for him if he ended up winning the primary. But I think they just want a frothing pseudo populist that they can connect to.
Anti-establishment candidate.
Yeah, exactly. Precisely that. Yes.
Nick, all right, we gotta get your opinion on this. Who do you think's gonna run in 2024?
I think I'm gonna shock you guys because you guys went for the craziest answer. I've had this conversation with David a lot. My choice for the Republican nominee in 2024, who I think is gonna be the nominee, is Mitt Romney.
Hey yo, what the fuck?
I think that 2024 will be the last gasp of the quote unquote reasonable Republican. It'll be the last chance for them. And Mitt Romney is not a reasonable Republican by any stretch of the imagination. His record is atrocious, and he's a terrible person.
But that's just any Republican, basically.
Yeah, like of like the your Reagan Republicans. This is the last of that. That's why I think it's going to be like Mitt Romney. But they'll attach somebody to him, like Marjorie Taylor Greene as his VP to
fuck.
like
McCain Palin Part 2, baby.
basically, except for Marjorie Taylor Greene actually like knows how to work the media as opposed to Palin, who thought she knew how to run the media. So
Again, it's just like the batshit crazy takes.
yeah,
I do agree that I think if we are to have a quote-unquote reasonable Republican again, 2024 is kind of that last window.
yeah, and the truth is, it's funny because 2024 should be the Kamala Harris versus whatever Republican they throw out there, but Kamala is proving to be so unpopular and so unlikable. Guess who could have seen that coming?
She pulled out of the California primary right before it, like right before the deadline.
She would have finished behind fucking Bloomberg.
That's an L.
You can't finish behind Bloomberg and be a serious candidate. That's why. But that's why I think Joe is gonna be like wheeled out, despite the fact that his brain will be melted by then, just pudding.
Yep.
And they'll wheel him out one more time, and he'll hey fat and this and listen here Jack, and
challenge someone to a push-up contest.
They'll push him on a U-Haul dolly, and then they'll go like
the only connection to FDR that Joe Biden will have ever earned is the stage photos to make him look competent and normal when he's clearly not.
I mean, considering his immigration policy, I think he's also Japanese American internment FDR as well.
So
hey, there's nothing we can do. What can we do at this point? No.
So as you can see, people, that the Mouthful of History does not have a firm consensus yet, but we'll see how it goes.
And we'll keep talking shit in the meantime.
In the meantime, Caroline, roll that theme song.
Fuck Andrew Jackson.
Fuck Andrew Jackson.
Fuck Andrew Jackson.
Or we're just gonna die like patriots.
There's nothing better. There's no bigger middle finger. Hey, you want to put me in the suicide mission? Okay, I'm just going to keep living.
He clearly figured out how to go Super Saiyan.
He wanted Schmeling dead, but he just wouldn't die.
He was anti-bank, anti-paper money, and he's on the $20 bill.
Nico just comes out of nowhere, soars across the sky.
All right, and welcome back to A Mouthful of History. I am Nick, joined with me, Cameron.
Hello.
And David.
What's poppin', everyone? Thanks for rejoining us.
And once again, we're going to let David kind of saunter us into the meat of the story.
So, last time we had left off, Arevalo is making changes in Guatemala. The 1944 revolution has both succeeded and started to consolidate, right? And so you not only have this new government established, it has actually started to lay the bedrock of a pretty solid social democratic foundation. But there were also problems. There were also threats of instability and even overthrow. And so that takes us into talking about Francisco Arana. So just a refresher, because we did mention him in passing in the last episode, he was one of the 2 military officers who overthrew Ponce. He was a conservative national hero who many saw as a candidate for the 1950 election against the progressive Jacobo Arbenz. For a while, he did not attempt to try anything against Arevalo, both because of the concessions he got as the chief of the armed forces, which were very nice, very cushy, and because he thought he had a legitimate shot in the 1950 election. So it wasn't so much that he believed in democracy and left it alone to develop because, he believed in the process. He really just kind of left it alone because 1, he got a cushy gig, and then 2, he thought he could win legitimately.
Wait, so is Arana like a gray area kind of person? Of course, he's one of the guys that threw over Ponce, but is he like somewhere in the middle between all of this, or is he like one of those guys we got to look out for? Like, no.
I'd say gray area is pretty fair. He did seem to be sincere in his overthrow of Ponce. However, he also did love power and money.
Who doesn't? Like,
Get up for the money, for the power, the fame. Don Broca reference.
Almost everybody who ever led or was part of a revolution Of course they crave power. It's to the degree that you're asking what kind of power do they crave.
First you get the money, then you get the power, then you get the women.
That sounds familiar. Is that Scarface?
Yeah.
Of course. So for a while he didn't try anything, but eventually he did. So the scheme that he decided on to take power wasn't a straight up coup. However, it was pretty much close enough. So on July 16th, 1949, he went to Arevalo to demand that Arevalo replace his entire cabinet with pro-Arana figures and forcibly retire Arbenz from the army. So he wouldn't launch a straight coup, but he would basically set things up to where he would have a huge institutional advantage in the 1950 election and also get rid of Arbenz, who was really his main rival for power.
I love that. I just picture it like, walking up to the, whatever the executive lives and like, okay, here's the deal. Here's how we're going to handle it. You are going to replace your cabinet and you're going to step aside. And then I'm going to step in. I'm going to take over in 2 years when the election happens. Okay. That's it. I think we have a deal here, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a very harebrained scheme. And in keeping with such a harebrained idea, when Arana gave Arevalo this ultimatum, Arevalo is like, oh, well, can I have a couple days to make preparations so I can get ready? And Arana, being a bit of a doofus, agrees, and he demands that Arevalo starts this transfer of power on the 18th, which, of course, gave Arevalo time to tell Arbenz and coordinate a plan to arrest Arana. So they sent a party to arrest him on the 18th, but a shootout ended up occurring between the two parties, which left Arana dead. So, with him out of the picture, the pathway to the presidency was basically cleared for Arbenz.
Was this like a Wild West saloon shootout with like the 44 man like
Or was this like a Robespierre thing? You guys know how like Robespierre, when the Reign of Terror finally turned on him,
I actually don't know.
Yeah, he tried to shoot himself, but he was so non-committal to shooting himself that he jerked his hand. He shot his jaw off.
Oh, that is brutal.
Yeah, so he really, it's like, any last words?
No. I am incapable of words.
You're just like, yeah, that's what I thought. Max.
So when they finally led him to the guillotine, he was basically wrapped up. Just looked terrible.
That is awful. No, Arana did not end up like that. It was just a standard shootout. Hopefully there was at least some cool moments, but yeah, Arana got murked.
Hopefully Arana went out like what's his name did in Scarface. That's where we make our second Scarface reference.
With cocaine on his nose.
Cocaine on his nose, just like sitting out of his mansion, just taking bullets from 20 guys before some guy shoots him in the back.
His shirt's off, like with his chiseled abs, be like, I'm gonna go down fighting.
Well,
I'm gonna go down fighting.
It's funny I'll talk about coke because that is going to become a part of our story at the very end in the epilogue.
But hold on, we had a mouthful of history. Are Pepsi fans?
That was so lame. I love it. So Jacobo Arbenz. Let's review this fella. So he is the other hero of the 1944 coup against Ponce. Though he didn't have the same level of power or influence in the military that Arana did, he was still a strong second, and he was a national hero.
Everybody loves a good number 2.
You know, like American Idol, like usually the runner-up always gets the better career.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's right.
Probably.
Like, yeah, that's very relevant here.
Our bet this completely applies to Arbenz.
Yeah, well,
entirely,
that's
yes.
because the number 2 person isn't locked into whatever dumb contract the American Idol winner gets.
Who would Arbenz be when it comes to American Idol runner-ups?
Probably Clay Aiken, if I had to guess.
Clay. Wait, did Kelly Clarkson win?
Yes, she was the first winner.
Oh shit!
Why do I know all this shit?
Yeah,
Anyway,
I don't know any of this.
We do, but like Arbenz is like equivalent to runner-up American Idol energy.
All right, David, give us a little more Arbenz trivia.
So even though Arbenz was a national hero and basically the second most influential person in both the military and the country as a whole, a lot of people still didn't know a lot about him. He was very quiet and aloof, very stoic. He had the respect of his troops because of how dedicated and just graceful he generally was, but no one knew a lot about what was going on inside his head. And in fact, some, including the U.S. State Department, believed that he didn't actually really have any strongly held convictions, and that he only kind of adapted his progressive politics out of convenience to attain power.
Like you do.
But regardless, he became the progressive candidate because many in the progressive coalition believed a military man needed to be their candidate. Otherwise, they faced the threat of possible overthrow, especially as things were starting to polarize a little bit more. So we have the 1950 election, and Arbenz wins with 65% of the vote. And it wasn't even really close, because there were multiple candidates, not just two. And the person who came in second, Miguel Ydígoras Fuentes, he came in second with only about 18% of the vote.
I just imagine the State Department after seeing the election results come in going like, wait, what? Really? That guy? Like,
Right?
as if the American political history doesn't have a history of dark horse candidates coming out of nowhere.
The Dulles brothers are like licking their lips. They're like,
I smell socialist.
Yep.
No, but okay.
So that brings us to Jacobo and his wife, Maria Cristina Villanova. So Maria came from a wealthy Salvadoran family who not only pampered her, but paid for the best education that money could buy. Ever since a young age, she had been troubled by the poverty and inequality she had seen in El Salvador, as well as in Latin America in general. Though she didn't really say anything to her family about it after a while because they just would not listen to her concerns. They didn't really try to encourage the empathy that she had as a child.
Girl, you have money. Leave it alone. Let the poors deal with themselves, basically.
Basically,
it's
yeah.
like, why would you care about poor people, Maria? It's that capitalistic
way of looking at things.
Capitalistic selfishness sort of way of life.
And actually for them too, capitalistic, but also kind of feudalistic because they were moneyed elite in a semi-feudal, largely agrarian world, even though they themselves lived in the city.
Boy, do I love pupusas.
Oh, pupusas are amazing.
They are god tier food.
Oh, that could have been our discourse.
They're okay.
Yes.
Anyway.
At least they're okay.
They're okay.
No, they're amazing. Nick, wrong again. Anyway, she read widely about politics and the state of the world during her education that her family paid for, and she became really sympathetic to leftist ideas. Now, in the course of her travels, Maria did meet Jacobo in Guatemala while on a trip with her family, and long story short, the two eventually married in 1937. Now, with Arbenz, especially at first, he didn't really have a concrete ideological knowledge like Maria did at first. You know, he wasn't very well read or anything like that, but he did have an aversion to all the inequality and repression that he had seen in the military during the dictatorships of Ubico and Ponce. So not really someone who's becoming a leftist through study, but really just through the injustice that he's seeing firsthand.
She's the anti-Nancy Reagan.
Yes.
Nancy Reagan took an otherwise apolitical Ronald Reagan, who was your typical Hollywood lefty, especially when he was the head of the SAG, and molded him into the conservative demigod he is now. She just basically did the opposite for Arbenz.
No.
Yeah?
I kid you not. So I was in San Diego with my friend Mike, and we were at this French restaurant called Côte d'Azur, and there was a Vons next door. Or I think I went to Ralph's or Vons. We saw a Dare booth.
A
Dare booth?
A Dare booth.
Like the anti-drug Dare booth?
Like the Nancy Reagan fucking
Oh my God.
Dare booth. But I think they adapted for bullying. That's no longer drugs.
Oh, okay.
It's a
That's because more and more we're just realizing that drugs aren't as big of a deal as they made it out to be.
The Do All the Drugs campaign now.
Yeah, and also the way the Dare campaign went about it was hilariously ineffective, but that's a topic for another day. So, with Maria and Jacobo now being married, the two of them began to host gatherings at their place that actually kind of resembled the elite social gatherings that Maria grew up in. Except in this case, it was labor organizers, activists, and intellectuals who attended these functions.
It's like a salon.
Ranging from general progressives to just full-on communists. And in the process, the two became leftists.
Goddamn right.
And Nick, it's funny that you bring up Nancy Reagan because that is a really good comparison. But others compared Maria to a figure like Eleanor Roosevelt or Eva Perón.
I was going to say that, like the Latin American, another power couple.
Yep.
Yeah, Eva Perón, probably another future topic on this show sometime.
If not even just reviewing the musical, right?
Yes.
So that sort of is who Jacobo and Maria are as a couple. Really Guatemala's premier power couple. And so that leads us to Jacobo's crowning achievement, Ley 900.
You got sex 900 times?
The The laid 900.
Yeah, and it was apparently 1 through 899 didn't do it, but 900.
What are you saying, like the 900 slaps? No, I'm just kidding.
The 900th time was the magic time. No, but late 900 was a sweeping land reform bill passed June 17th, 1952, that wasn't meant just to help people, but also really change power relationships in the countryside. So the main provisions of this bill was that basically all unused land on large estates, those over 672 acres, would be appropriated and given to people in the countryside. Idle land on medium-sized estates, so those from 224 to 672 acres, would be appropriated only if more than 2/3 of the total land was unused. And then estates that were small, so less than 224 acres, were unaffected.
That makes sense. I mean, basically, get some of that land to the people.
Exactly. And it really does kind of need to be stated that this isn't socialist, because it's redistributive, so it's social democratic, but it's still handing it to individual smaller landholders, which is going to become important in a moment.
Yeah, if it was socialist, the government would just take it and they would create a government entity whose job it was to hire people to work the land.
Yeah, it would be like a communal collective sort of model, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
My favorite part, though, about Lay 900 is how they compensated the landowners. Because, and I see Nick rightfully grinning gleefully over here because this is amazing. They compensated the landowners based on the values that those landowners had claimed on their taxes, which made landowners so mad because they always underreported the value of their lands to skip on taxes.
Mini rant here for a second. Here's the deal, everybody. If you want to be compensated properly for what you do, then you have to actually give the right numbers. However, if you're a hilariously evil corporation that is exploiting the land and then taking that money to just make yourself rich while fucking over the locals, then you kind of have this coming. So quit being a little bitch, quit whining, and you know what? Maybe next time actually pay taxes to what the stuff was actually cost. Otherwise, I don't feel sorry for you. Fuck them.
Say it, Nick, say it.
Fuck them.
Fuck them.
Fuck them. And so, of course, these landowners start crying, soiling themselves, needing to change their big boy and big girl diapers.
Wah.
Because they are big mad. But anyway, moving on from mocking these just spoiled baby bully brats, the land reform would be carried out by local committees that included rural workers. And these local committees in turn answered to government committees that also included workers in order to make sure that workers in general were included at every step of the process. So this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, right? Like, it's not only helping people, but it's also really getting people involved in the process itself and in the structures of power itself. And the results were actually fantastic. There were some hiccups along the way because this is a just complete challenge to the status quo and the way things are established in the countryside.
It's something completely new. So when something completely new happens, you expect hiccups. If things go by smoothly, A, you either got lucky, or B, you overlooked something.
Exactly. And so in its context, it went as smoothly as you could realistically hope for. However, there were some isolated instances of peasants fighting over land. You know, say two villages had rival claims to a piece of land, or even within a village, there are people who have some family disagreements over who owns a plot of land. Basically, there were some isolated instances of problems, but the Guatemalan elite, of course, used those instances to say that the countryside was in chaos, that violence was everywhere, when there was literally zero evidence of that being the case. A similar thing happened recently in the United States, where violent crime went up like a little fraction of a percent, and all of a sudden the media couldn't shut the fuck up about how America was descending into crime and chaos when it was just a minor kind of hiccup.
Yeah, you kind of need like sustained evidence of things happening for it to actually be even a fucking data point. You take a look at one of these things and that's just kind of whatever.
Because if I'm not mistaken, like, crime's kind of going down overall, right?
It's gone up since the pandemic slightly, and
but like the overall trend, it's like,
yeah,
we're kind of trending. It's like almost trending downward in a way.
In the big picture, yes. Like before COVID, it was trending down. Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, with all that said, the Guatemalan elite kind of lying about what's happening in the countryside, You still see this land reform happening at a pretty amazing rate. By the time Arbenz was overthrown in 1954,
Spoiler alert.
yeah, sorry for the spoiler, folks, hundreds of thousands of acres had been redistributed, including 173,000 from the United Fruit Company alone.
Should we tell them what the United Fruit Company is now?
Aren't they Chiquita?
Chiquita Bananas.
Fuck you, Chiquita. And actually, Jacobo and Maria even appropriated land from their own family estates.
That's walking the walk and talking the talk. Good on
Exactly.
you. Good on you.
No special exceptions. They held themselves to the letter of the law exactly.
Practice what you preach.
That's right.
How about some other reforms, David?
Let's get to some other reforms.
Give me those reforms. Those sexy reforms.
Oh, so good.
Give me these positivity fucking... You know what I mean. The reforms.
So
You get the picture.
so one of the biggest reforms was the creation of the CNCG. As we'd mentioned in the last episode, labor unions had been growing in the cities ever since the 10 years of spring started, especially with the formation of the CGTG, which is basically the urban collection of workers in the city, like all those unions together, kind of like the Guatemalan equivalent of the AFL-CIO. So what Arbenz did was help expand the labor code into the countryside, which led to more rural workers forming their own unions. This in turn led to the creation of the Confederación Nacional Campesina de Guatemala, CNCG, which was basically the rural equivalent of the CGTG. So you have the CNCG and then the CGTG. And again, that's basically just the coalition of the both rural and urban workers who were a really important feature of Arbenz's coalition.
Remember that. I'll be on the test.
Yeah, I hope y'all are taking notes.
A mouthful of history quiz, winner gets a large Baja Blast.
Or something good. Anyway.
What? Hey, no. Hey.
Anyway.
I don't want to fucking go down this road.
All right. Anyway.
I know it's self-inflicted, but keep going.
The reforms also extended to education. As you'll recall in the last episode, remember Arevalo? Is that how you pronounce it?
Arevalo, yeah.
Arevalos had a literacy campaign that was on the meh side of okay.
Didn't really go anywhere.
This one had more success to the rural workers wanting to learn to read and write so they could petition for land. See, now that you've shown the people that they can get something, that's something positive for themselves so that they can actually, move on and something better out of themselves, now they have the incentive to go do it. You can learn a lot from incentivizing people to do things that they don't otherwise want to do with monetary gain. Hint, hint, wink, wink.
Double wink. Lots of blink.
Also, more successful because the CNCG created more of a connection between the government and the countryside.
And then also the whole infrastructure issues we have here in the United States about the bills and whatnot. Arbenz began infrastructure projects, most notably building a highway from the capital city of Guatemala to Santo Tomas on the Caribbean coast. Since before then, the only link between the capital and the East Coast was a railway system owned by the U.S., the Pan American Railroad.
Yep. And so basically this was another way of asserting Guatemala's own independence because they didn't want to be reliant on U.S. companies, whether it is railway systems or the United Fruit Company or any other sign of U.S. corporate hegemony.
Never rely on fruit companies.
No.
There's no ethical consumption under capitalism.
What? Speaking of capitalism and other ideologies, this brings us to the Communists of Guatemala. So the Guatemalan Communist Party, which was the PGT, Partido Guatemalteco del Trabajo, was a communist party made up of workers and intellectuals. Now, the Communist Party, even in the Arbenz administration, did not have any actual cabinet positions, and it was actually only a small minority in Congress. But many members, including the leader, Jose Manuel Fortuny, became close confidants of Arbenz.
Confidants.
Even FDR there were some hints of the Communist Party in not in his cabinet, but, in that circle.
Yeah,
Well,
in that coalition.
Well, I mean, I think you look at all the reforms that Arbenz passed, and there's no doubt in my mind that he got consultancy from them.
Yeah, there's some things in here that lean Marxist. Obviously, as David said, they're not Marxist per se. They're more social democracy, but you can start seeing the hint of Marxism in there.
Exactly. And, of course, it is worth clarifying, like we also talked about in our episode in Iran with Mohammad Mossadegh, these communists did not have ties to the Soviet Union. In fact, what they were trying to do was forge closer ties with other Latin American communist parties, but because there was so much dictatorships and other sort of unfavorable conditions for them, they were really only able to establish relationships with the Cuban and Costa Rican communist parties.
So they're kind of like making like a Pan-American communist union.
Exactly. But because there were so many dictatorships in the region, especially at this point, because even during the time Arevalo came to power, there were actually more democracies that had since crumbled in Latin America. Of course, sometimes thanks in part to the U.S. There were less democracies in the region now.
The Cuban Revolution hadn't even happened at this point yet.
Exactly. And actually in Cuba, this was around the time where Fulgencio Batista overthrew the democratic system that they did have, replaced it with a dictatorship.
And this is by the time like Che Guevara is making his rounds around South America.
Oh, spoiler alert, he's going to come in a little bit later. But anyways, yeah, so there's no ties to the Soviet Union. And, you know, this is really becoming, I think, a repeated theme on this show. But like pretty much every other communist party we've talked about in the Global South, the Guatemalan communists were fierce idealists who wanted equality for their people and independence from foreign repression. They were not Soviet puppets.
We can talk a lot about the pros and cons of the Soviet Union, and I'd argue there are a lot more pros than cons, somewhat.
Especially under Lenin, I would argue. I don't have as good of a knowledge of what happened after, but...
Yeah, tankies, I'm sorry. I'm just not a Stalin fan. But, like, even the Russian Revolution, the communist uprising, was about better world for the Russians because it sucked.
Well,
Yeah.
like Michael Parenti said it best. Like, did the Russians leave the country in a better condition in which they found it? Yeah.
Yeah. And also, it's worth noting that since the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia has now become a right-wing oligarchy where, like, everyone is depressed, unemployed, alcoholic. Like, it has gotten worse.
Not even just Russia, but the entire Eastern Bloc has kind of given way to fascism.
Yeah. And the huge rise in human trafficking, too. But anyway, another topic for another time. You know, sometimes in elections here, we talk about the lesser of two evils. So whatever you think about the Soviet Union, you know, again, I still don't even have a coherent view of it myself necessarily. But compared to what is happening now in Russia and Eastern Europe, you can't argue that the Soviet Union was worse.
I just want to make a quick side note before we move on. David Brott said something that I think it's important to note, and I'm sad that we're only mentioning it now. It is perfectly okay to say, I don't know enough about that topic to make a comment on it. But if you point me in the right direction, I will read, and I hope that I could learn something. You don't have to have an opinion on something just because it's a hot button topic or something like that.
Don't feel pressure to have a take on it when you don't have a take on it.
China, for instance, I don't know enough about China to have a firm opinion on whether or not they're good or bad. And that's fine. It's fine not to know about anything. If you want to learn about it, go ahead and learn about it. But don't feel pressure to have an opinion just because.
Well, it's impossible to have your feelers everywhere, you know what I mean? Like, if you try to expand so much, you're essentially a master of none.
Exactly. And I think that's really well said, you guys, because that's why I comment and follow Latin American politics. But in other places, like China is a good example, I also don't have a meaningful knowledge about it, so I don't comment on it. And I think more people could learn to follow that lead.
It just leads to better understanding and better conversation. But anyway, I just wanted to get that out because I thought it was important. I think you gave me a proper segue for it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point to note. If you don't know about it in depth, you don't need to have a take. But anyway, getting back to the PGT, even the US recognized what the PGT was. An embassy official would later say, the political parties were groups of bums of the first order, lazy, ambitious, they wanted money, were palace hanger-ons. Those who could work, had a sense of direction, ideas, knew where they wanted to go, were Fortuny and his PGT friends. They were very honest, very committed. This was the tragedy. The only people who were committed to hard work were those who were, by definition, our worst enemies. So,
idiots.
Even from the embassy, they're like, yeah, you know, these communists, we have no proof that they have any connection to the Soviet Union. They're very honest. They're very committed. His words, not ours.
Because they're Marxists, they're our enemy.
Yep, exactly. And we're actually going to have, sorry for so much foreshadowing, folks, but we're also going to have a U.S. official come up later to say something similar, but even more
heartbreaking
and respectful of our bends. But we'll get to that later. Getting back to this moment in Guatemala, the general goal that the PGT had, kind of along more orthodox Marxist lines, was to keep modernizing Guatemala into a social democracy and eventually a more urban country, since it's still mostly agricultural at this point, rather than immediately trying to create a fully communist society, because they basically believed Guatemala was too rural for full communism. And just to review, just really briefly in a couple sentences, what that means is because, according to more orthodox Marxist ways of thinking, people in the countryside do not organically develop class consciousness the same way people do in the cities, because when you're in the countryside, you just live with your family on the farm, day in, day out. You're just working against nature.
You already live by your means, essentially.
Exactly. And you're also, you're battling nature on a daily basis. You're not explicitly battling bosses. But when you get to the cities, you're working side by side with other workers. Your enemy on a daily basis basically are the bosses and the owners. And so living side by side with other workers, you are organically talk to each other about your working conditions and develop class consciousness through your collective ways of living. And that would eventually evolve into a sort of revolutionary class consciousness where the working class would seize the means of productions. That is the orthodox Marxist way of thinking, and that's sort of what the PGT ascribes to. So their way of looking at it then was to keep creating a social democratic sort of modern system that would be a better form of capitalism that could eventually, when Guatemala had enough of a urban working proletariat, could be turned into something more Marxist.
Yeah, it's not like Mao, who did come up with a working theory of how to blend Marxism and rural communities.
Yeah, how to bring Marxism into the countryside. Yeah. So this is what the Guatemalan Communist Party was working toward, basically. And, of course, in response, we have the United Fruit Company.
Our first order, if you will, our empire. They're the worst, okay? I have nothing nice to say about them, but I have to explain where they were at this point.
Just awful.
Yeah. The United Fruit Company wielded enormous control over the state. Obviously, they controlled most of the fruit, which was the main export of Guatemala, so that does wield a lot of power. Though it was very clear that they were exploiting their workers. Our best negotiation with the UFCO slanted towards fair treatment of the Guatemalans. Shocking.
Yeah. Oh, wow. He wanted workers to be treated well. Gasp.
What a novel concept.
Company at first demanded a 3-year extension on their contract. Our Benz would gladly extend this contract as long as the ports were improved. The government got final say in disputes and compensation given for the cost of exhausted land. These are not things that are, oh my gosh, he's asking for so much. These are normal things. And actually, ports improving would only help with distribution of your product. I don't understand why this is such a big deal.
Yeah, it would boost commerce, the ability to move product.
But remember, the goal of a capitalist is to spend less on labor.
Yep. And the goal of an imperialist, or in this case, the private arm of imperialism, is, of course, not just profit, but also domination.
Yeah, so, of course, in response to this, the UFCO could have just been adults about this. But instead of that, they just laid off 4,000 workers. Sorry, I saw 4K on the notes, and I'm like, oh, 4K televisions.
They laid off some OLEDs.
Samsung, get the fuck out of here.
So the court, in response, seized land to pay back wages because, now you have a bunch of people out of work for no fucking reason except for the UFCO being a bunch of whiny infants.
Completely justified.
The big hit comes when the Guatemala government offers 600,000 plus to buy seized lands after the implementation of Ley 900. If I remember correctly, this was in line with what they said that the land was worth.
Exactly. Yep. This goes back to them underreporting on their taxes,
which they got upset about.
Yep.
From this point, the UFCO would be working behind the scenes in Washington to have something done about Arbenz, using their extensive ties to the Eisenhower administration, read the Dulles brothers, to make sure their voice was heard even beyond normal lobbying. So this is basically beyond just the bullshit of regular lobbying. That look, companies lobby Congress for shit all the time and mostly get it. This is basically a company actively working with Washington to form a coup.
Essentially crying to mommy.
Yep. This is, like Nick said, a mixture of regular lobbying and essentially nepotism within the ranks of the Eisenhower administration.
So I just want to, one more thing, point out, fuck UFCO. Fuck them hard.
Yep.
Chiquita. This turned out so bad for you that you had to change your name because
everyone hated you
Everybody
so much.
hated you so much. And you got off way too fucking easy. It is a sad fact of my beliefs that I don't believe in hell because all of your executives should be burning there for eternity.
They really should.
And I'm going to pass this off because I could spend the rest of the episode ranting about how bullshit this is.
You and me both, buddy. So this is when trouble starts to brew in Guatemala. And we start to see cracks in the coalition of the Arbenz government. So again, Arbenz's closest supporters were the CGTG and the CNCG, as well as the Communist Party. The other revolutionary parties, all the parties that really held the chambers of Congress, and the military were the other big players in the coalition. Now, the main political parties, as we kind of heard before from that U.S. embassy official, often bickered and had many overly ambitious leaders, but they did stick with Arbenz because of their nationalism and out of support for his urban reforms that helped their constituencies. Arbenz also kept those in the military well paid, and he made sure the officers within had plenty of perks to offset the ire of the anti-communists that were in the military's ranks. So you do have this working sort of environment where the other non-communist political parties and the military are pretty good with Arbenz himself. And again, a lot of people really respected his very stoic, principled way of doing things. But
didn't matter.
Yep. Unfortunately, as U.S. outrage continued to grow over Arbenz's land reform, the non-communist political parties in the military, who had really more tolerated than supported his reforms in the countryside, because again, this was just not a world they were connected to. And in the case of the military, sometimes in what little connections they did have to the countryside, it was, looking down on the indigenous people there. Because of this, a lot of them began to grow anxious about the chances of their government's survival under Arbenz. So you had an event coming up in the midst of this chaos, and that was the Caracas Conference. This was a 1954 meeting of the Organization of American States, the OAS.
We also know another OAS. We just talked about it previously.
That's right, we do.
What's up with OAS? So you had the
Popular
Organisation
acronym.
Armée Secrète, and now it's the Organization of American States.
Yep. So this one met 1954 in Caracas, Venezuela. And Guatemala really saw it as a chance to rebuff the United States.
But hold on. What does this OAS do?
So this OAS was created right after World War II. And it is called the Organization of American States, which is basically the U.S. and Latin America. And it was basically founded by the U.S. as an anti-communist, or in favor of anti-communism as a coalition in the Western Hemisphere. However, it also allowed, theoretically, for other Latin American countries to air their own grievances, theoretically.
And the most recent example of OAS interference was Bolivia.
Yes, the OAS still exists today and still often does the bidding of the U.S.
Yeah, whenever an election seems fishy, that means that a leftist won the election. Suddenly the OAS is very interested in whether or not the election was legitimate.
Yep. Anyway, in this case, in 1954, Guatemala wanted a chance to rebuff the United States. The U.S., on the other hand, came in demanding policies based in free trade and private U.S. investment, as well as resolutions against communism, basically to target Guatemala. So Secretary of State Dulles and Guatemalan Foreign Minister Guillermo Torriello often dueled verbally, and Torriello clearly won in the court of public opinion. His speeches garnered usually about twice as much applause as Dulles, as well as just generally more enthusiastic applause. People told Torriello in private how great of a job he was doing, and really hyped him up. It was wind in the sails of Guatemala. Then the U.S. submitted a resolution justifying some sort of OAS action if any country entertained communism. And again, this was specifically aimed at Guatemala. A lot of the other countries kind of voiced a very gentle opposition to this, so the resolution was watered down. But because of the U.S. basically holding a metaphorical gun over the head of all of Latin America, the end vote was 17 votes yes, only 1 no, which was Guatemala, and then 2, Mexico and Argentina, abstaining.
Grow some balls, Mexico and Argentina. If you're going to vote no, just vote no.
And the sad thing, there were many sad things about this, but one is that pretty much all the democracies and semi-democracies in Latin America had expressed a lot of sympathy for Guatemala, whereas the dictatorships were the only groups that were like ardently pro-US. But when the rubber hit the road, this was the vote. And again, the resolution had been watered down to near meaninglessness. There wasn't really any binding action the OAS could do, even if a country was vaguely found to be entertaining communism. But even with that, the US press still treated it as a win, and many Latin Americans, rightly I think, saw it as a spineless capitulation from their governments to US influence in the region. This discouraged the Guatemalans, who had hoped other democracies and semi-democracies would back them openly, as they often did in private. And the book I was reading about this shares all these quotes from a lot of government officials and diplomats from these countries who are basically saying, yeah, we supported you, but we were too scared to vote for it. We did not feel good about voting for it, but
A lot of bitch-assness going on.
yeah, ultimately they chickened out and they left Guatemala metaphorically alone. This also came alongside psychological warfare that the CIA was starting to conduct against Guatemala. They were hijacking radio airways to broadcast pro-coup messages as the coup itself was starting to be formed. And at this point, many in Guatemala feared that the US itself was preparing to intervene in some way, either directly or indirectly.
No, we don't get our hands dirty. We have people to do that for us.
We have our guys.
Wink, wink.
Wink, wink. Wink, wink.
So Cameron, let's hear about the coup itself.
Okay, so the coup actually happens, and there's an attack force led by remnants of the overthrown dictatorship, because where do you get support? The dictatorship often runs to the United States and be like, we need help, or the United States is like, hey, got a job for you. Want to get your power back? They're like, yay! And it's like, well, do this. Okay. So they're led by the remnants of the overthrown dictatorship and conservative parts of the military coming from Honduras. So I'm assuming that this is coming from exile.
Yep. And also, I should say, coming from Honduras, but also by way of Nicaragua, because the US's favorite dictator in the region, Somoza, was really one of their main guys. Because, again, the US loves dictators.
Well, yeah, and like initially the coup went badly for...
Yeah, we still love dictators.
Like initially the coup went badly, like laughably bad, consistently failed airstrikes, missions to attack Arbenz strong points were failing, like the Shell station or the radio transmitter. Over time, there were small victories in CIA propaganda to help make people start to believe that successes weren't actually there.
You don't actually have to win anything. You just have to tell people you're winning. Like, enough people will not go actually looking for the facts. So
I mean, like look at what happened in the Tet Offensive. We thought we were winning, and then bam.
Yep.
And even with this tide turn, the coup forces that were still not a serious threat. However, many in the administration thought the U.S. would further attack the regime after this coup failed, some even fearing a direct invasion by the United States.
And again, real quick, it's worth reiterating, this is what the U.S. was doing in Latin America up until about 2 decades before this point, when FDR came in. But before that, that was standard American practice. So it was not paranoia. It was something that had happened to, like, people's grandparents or even parents.
Yeah.
And then also overall, like these small victories in propaganda, like over time, those in government were kind of looking out for themselves. They were often abandoning Arbenz now. And after 2 weeks of constant assaults, Arbenz steps down as president in deference to Carlos Diaz, who himself was soon replaced. Later on, Arbenz took sanctuary in Mexico, and then the government went through a series of different transitory juntas that became increasingly right-wing and authoritarian, as the U.S. didn't want an administration with any ties or sympathies towards Arbenz whatsoever. And they eventually settled on General Carlos Castillo Armas, one of the coup leaders who had a penchant for cruelty and self-enrichment. So the ironic thing is that Arbenz was not a communist. He was probably like a social democrat.
Yeah, actually, the
I
best.
would say he's like a socialist.
He wasn't a communist by any stretch of the imagination.
This is a perfect coup companion to the one in Iran. Another social democrat, maybe a little more leftist leanings, who probably, save for wanting his country's resources to go to his own people, novel concept, would have played ball with the U.S. and other things. But the U.S., you see red everywhere, basically, at this point. It just kind of gives you an idea of how right-wing the United States government is, because they see communism even when it'd be laughable to consider any of this communism.
Yep. And also worth noting, too, very racist, because a big part of their way of looking at it was, well, these people don't have the sophistication to build this sort of liberatory project, so they must be being egged on by the Soviet Union and acting as their puppets, because there's no way these people are sophisticated and organized enough to do something like this on their own.
It's this 20th century civilizing mission.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's more white man's burden bullshit, but you know,
Yep.
for a Cold War world.
Yep, exactly. And so the coup succeeds, and we're left with the aftermath. One of the biggest things is that the CIA is reinvigorated after back-to-back success in quote-unquote communist overthrows.
The CIA is nothing more than the rich kid who gets accepted into college even though his grades are mediocre because of who his family is. This is what these successes are.
Yep. And again, can't be overstated enough. These communist overthrows, not against communists, as Nick had just said. Another result was a greater rise in anti-Americanism in Latin America. And this is where our friend Che Guevara comes in. Che had been present during the overthrow. He had been helping out the Arbenz regime because he was a young idealist. And his conclusion after seeing the overthrow was that democratic reform was not enough in the fight against U.S. imperialism. He would also, as a result, foresee the Bay of Pigs invasion and help revolutionary Cuba prepare for it, leading to a humbling defeat for the CIA.
The U.S. never got a leg up on Cuba, unless you count, of course, the crippling
Sanction.
Well,
The
like
crippling
like
sanctions.
if you can't overthrow them directly, you
Starve-
embargo them,
you starve them out.
starve them out.
Yep.
But Cuba is hilariously, the U.S. can't do anything about it.
Nope. Not even after they tried all these just hilariously convoluted Wile E. Coyote like strategies to assassinate Fidel Castro, including giving him exploding cigar, trying to poison his beard as if his power was hidden within his beard.
Wasn't like a bomb in the cognac as well or something like that? Like, I don't know.
I haven't heard about that one, but very possible. I mean, they tried to also give him a poison wetsuit. Just, again, Wile E. Coyote shit. Going back to Arbenz, he would move around a lot, including in revolutionary Cuba, settle in Eastern Europe for a while, then back to Mexico, and it was in Mexico that he would pass away at age 57, possibly by suicide, like his daughter had a couple years before. He was basically just not the same after the coup.
So I pulled up an article about all the assassination attempts on Castro. Number 1 is the exploding cigar. Number 2 was the reluctant Cuban. I guess it was the mob tried killing Castro.
Yeah.
And then the painted seashell. And then you had the contaminated diving suit
Yep.
full of tuberculosis. And then a deadly lover taxed with assassinating. And then the poison pen.
Fucking A. Give me a 007 movie about Fidel Castro.
And then the psychedelic speech. I guess planning to sabotage Castro's speeches by spraying his broadcasting studio with a chemical that would make him suffer similar hallucinations to LSD. And those are the top 7.
Let's get off that real quick. It's just kind of sad that's Arbenz, who, like I said, not a communist, at best a socialist, who didn't do anything wrong except for trying to do better by his people, and this was his ultimate fate.
Yep. And Castillo Armas, the one who basically became the dictator of Guatemala, himself was assassinated in 1957. But he was replaced by another right-wing military dictator after another sham election. So it wasn't like things got better after he got murked. Guatemala itself spiraled into a civil war that began in 1960 and did not end until 1996.
What?
1996. 36 years.
Oh my God.
Did not end until all three of us had already been born.
I was a sprightly 3-year-old.
Yeah, Nick and I were 6 when it ended. And this was between the US-backed military dictatorship and the predominantly indigenous leftist liberation forces who were fighting against the dictatorship. This civil war resulted in over 200,000 dead civilians and countless more displaced. And again, Guatemala is not a big country. You know, over 200,000 dead is tragic enough in any country. But as of 1996, I believe the population was something like 10 million. So when you have 200,000 dead and multitudes more like injured or displaced,
It's about 0.2%.
it's something that everybody feels. A UN commission after the Civil War concluded that about 93% of the crimes against humanity that were committed during the Civil War were committed by the military forces. And of the remaining 7%, it wasn't even just the leftist liberation forces, but actually about an even split between them and those who are not directly aligned with either side.
I take a firm stance that you can't commit war crimes against deadly right-wing dictatorships, but I don't know, I'm built different.
Right? And so this would all lead to a U.S. official who was surveying the scene in the late 80s, who is quoted as saying, "What we'd give to have an Arbenz now. We are going to have to invent one, but all the candidates are dead."
Fuck you.
Fuck the Dulles brothers. Fuck U.S. imperialism.
You don't get a mulligan on shit like that.
It's like, we're gonna do it. Like, no, you don't. Fuck them.
Yeah, fuck off. Fuck. Oh, what we would do for it. You had one. That was as good as it was going to get for you. You couldn't handle it because you let the fucking United Fruit Company, again, fuck you, Chiquita.
Fuck you, Chiquita.
Fuck you, Chiquita.
You let them, and the Dulles brothers run roughshod over American foreign policy. So fuck off. You don't get a redo on that shit.
Yep. And since the Civil War ended, Guatemala has had a representative democracy, but this was very different from the very, hopeful uprising that had given birth to 10 Years of Spring. The representative democracy that has emerged since 1996 emerged from violence, exhaustion, compromise with dictators, and U.S. imposed austerity. It's not the same thing that happened during the 10 Years of Spring, and because the general power relations in Guatemala weren't really reformed after 1996, they basically just brought in a democracy, but on top of an exhausted, violent, right-wing system that was just utterly inhumane to indigenous people and students and leftists. Because of that, Guatemala's had a largely right-wing government since then because of voter repression in the countryside, still acts of violence and suppression against leftists. All of these things mixed with, of course, the drug gangs, which goes back to what we were talking about earlier. The drug gangs that have been able to arise in the vacuum in Central America, brought about by U.S. policy in the region during the Cold War.
Yeah, I don't know what else to tell everybody. Sometimes these stories just don't have happy endings. We'd love to tell you that from the ashes, Guatemala has risen to be a great leftist democracy, but no.
There's always hope.
There's always hope, and you've seen a lot of legit leftism spring out of Latin America from the ashes of all of these U.S. sanctioned coups and basically U.S. overlooking of Latin America.
And even the Catholic Church with liberation theology, like Father Romero too, and he was cut down by death squads.
Yeah, but tying it all together, to not end on a complete downer, there is hope. There are a lot of countries in Latin America that are sort of revitalizing that social democratic vision, and even, more of a socialist one. Hopefully that can spread more to Central America, because the project right now is a little bit more established in South America. So we don't know what the future will hold, but all I can say is just I hope the best for the Guatemalan people after this itself being a crime against humanity the government perpetuated against Guatemala in 1954.
And that ties up our 3 episodes on different Western revolutions and coups.
Yeah. Our sequence going from Iran to Algeria, now to Guatemala. Just really looking at resistance movements in the global south, which of course we can also harken back to our episode about Vietnam as well. I just hope that a lesson we can all take from this is to support colonized people, to support people all over the world who are fighting for their liberation, their independence, their freedom, and to not be patronizing violent racist assholes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Guatemala.
Shout out to Bolivia.
Yeah, shout out to Bolivia for real. Overcoming that coup.
Yeah, nothing makes me happier than seeing a coup leader actually in prison.
Right? Yeah. Fuck you, Agnes. Fuck off.
So we're going to tie this up here in a second, but before we go, we want to let you know that next time, so this one is an idea pitched to us by our editor and producer and honestly the person who makes these episodes run.
Make it sound good.
Caroline, she has had us researching, by this time anyway, plagues. I know we're kind of a little late to the plague thing, considering, we're in year 2 of a plague. So we're going to each kind of bring you a brief history of different plagues that hit the world at different times. And then after that, we're going to do our movie review. I think we already agreed on 1917.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did.
That'll wrap up this season.
It's been a messy year for our podcast, and we apologize for the bumps on the road, but As you all know, it's been a messy year for everyone. So thank you for your patience.
And a couple thank yous to our patrons.
Our patrons on Patreon. Y'all are amazing.
Our Patronians.
Our patrones.
By the way,
Nice.
if you haven't, I have a Nick versus on the Romanovs. I have a Nick versus on the Founding Fathers, a Nick versus Thomas Jefferson specifically.
I still need to see that one.
And more recently, I did one on just anti-vaxxers. I know it's not our history thing, but it seemed important for the time. All right, we like to give a special shout out to our patrons.
All right. So shout out to Alejandro, our friend, Philip Beadle, Coffin Cutie, Estefania, my madre, Sonia. Thank you. Zakia, Ben Spabaro, Gio Franco, Alex Millage, our boy Cameron's brother, and Lene. So thank you all. It is hugely appreciated. You guys and gals and non-binary folks among you really make this show possible, and we're very thankful for that.
Yeah.
Thank you for all your intersectional support, and it means a lot to us.
Look out for the Nick versus. David's got some really good book reviews on there. As we said last time, we removed for now the gaming thing because we just don't have the time for it, unfortunately.
And our schedules just don't link up the way they used to.
Yeah. So not in place of that, but as something new, I'm going to, starting probably in 2022, more likely, I'm going to be doing write-ups that compare the history of the time to how they're used in the Assassin's Creed games.
Nice. Oh, that's really cool.
Just to, tie them up. Are they historically accurate? Obviously not, but how they use history to highlight their story.
That is very cool.
So, like I said, that'll be in 2022 because I actually have to find a way to play the first Assassin's Creed because there's no way to play it right now.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I'd use your PS3, but your PS3 seems to have trouble finishing games.
Yeah, it is not hanging in there very well right now.
So anyway, thank you all. Thank you for all your support, and we look forward to hearing to you next time.
Catch y'all next time. Thanks again, everyone.
See you later.
Good night.